it's amazing how you explain stuff, and you are a really good teacher. And so I just wanted to diverge a little bit into the teaching world, just because I feel like whether you want to teach to people or are working in a company and need to do a presentation or talking with teammates or colleagues, you always need to explain, or at least make your thoughts sound simpler and clearer. And so I wonder if you have any tips to better explain concepts or things that you work on with all your experiences with YouTube and Cohere and your work at Apple and everything you've been in the teaching industry.
Yeah. Oh, great. Thank you. That's a great question. Actually, I've always, everybody has their own way to learn, right? Like some people build things, some people have to write all the details. I learn by teaching, and even the times in my life where I've tried not to teach and I've just done a job that's completely not requires teaching, I always gravitate to teaching because that's my way of understanding things. And as a matter of fact, it stems from difficulties. I have difficulties learning all my life in school. I was just lost in class. I get distracted very easily at meetings and talks. If you ever see me at a conference, just watch me. I'm like this because I get lost easily, right? And so when I see a talk that's full of formulas, I kind of have to either I'm lost or I completely try really hard to understand it with examples, with a simple example. And so my first advice is check out your weaknesses, because there may be a hidden strength there. When I teach, I have to talk to the slowest person in the room, because that's me, right? Like if I understand it myself, everybody will, because it just has to be at a level of simplicity that even I don't get lost, or I get lost in everything. So I explain to myself. Concrete tips is definitely don't take things for granted. I mean, I think people have, in academia and in industry, there's a bit of an ego where you have to sound professorial and you have to sound elevated. And I think nobody likes that. I mean, we pretend to because everybody does. But I think, people are scared that if you go and say something too simple, people will laugh or think they're stupid. I guarantee that's not the case. I've said simple things for years in front of everybody. As a matter of fact, I have a hard time trying to say things complicated. Like if I try to sound technical, I can't. And so I guarantee nobody thinks people are stupid if they say something in the simplest possible way. So always try to find the simplest example. I always ask myself, what is the simplest example that I can have in order to illustrate this concept? So I'll give you an example. Image recognition. I could explain image recognition as like you have a huge matrix of pixels and that's your image, and you multiply it by a vector and then you apply an activation function and da-ba-da-ba-da, right? Well, if the image is 28 by 28, why not make it 2 by 2? And why not make it black and white? So all of a sudden, I have 4 numbers, right? And if I can explain, I don't need to multiply this matrix by a vector. I actually can do all the operations. So I go, this is gray, it's 0.5. This is white, it's a 0. This is black, it's 1, right? Like I can do it with actual numbers, and somebody who doesn't know a matrix or a vector or matrix multiplication can follow, because they know how to add 1 plus 0. You know what I mean? And so I always try to bring it down to the simplest possible example. And if I can find an analogy, that's always good. Because here's something that happens, right? Like people always say they're bad at math, but that's not true. People are great at math. You could not survive if you were not good at math or physics. The logic to go around the world and figure out, if this is open from 2 to 4 on Saturdays, but not on Fridays, and today is Friday, like that logic is the same logic as math, right? And physics too. If I tell people to draw a kid jumping, they would draw a parabola. They know. But if I tell them to draw y equals minus 9.8x squared, they wouldn't know. Because what people are bad is not at math, it's at abstraction. And what most of education unfortunately does is that it takes the reality away from things, and it gives you something really abstract, and then teaches you that, and that's, you cannot appreciate it, right? Like if I take a song and you're hearing the music, instead I just take away the music and give you the notes, we wouldn't know, right? Only the experts would know. And so I piggyback on people's knowledge. Like people know how to operate the world. And so therefore, I'm not going to give them a formula. I'm going to give them a real life scenario where that formula appears hidden and tell them, what would you do here? And they know exactly what to do here. And then I say, okay, in this formula, what you did was this, right? So always, basically, advice for teachers, be humble with knowledge and with your peers. Don't be afraid of sounding stupid by being too simple. That's not the case. And always try to piggyback to reality and to the simplest possible example that illustrates things.
Thank you. Those are really good tips, especially the sounding too simple. I think that's one thing that I still need to get over, just because I recently had like a presentation for my PhD, and it's indeed relatively hard to know for those presentations when you don't really know the audience exactly, like who will it be. It's hard to know how high level or low level you need to be. And it's also, you are also in front of some professors and some postdocs and like experts. So it feels like you don't want to look like someone that is dumb or take them for dumb people by explaining like the very basics of a convolution or something that is essentially simple for them. Yeah, to me, it's hard to get over that fear of like not disappointing, but of sounding that I'm over explaining stuff and that it's simple, just get to the next step. I think you are right that it's definitely worth to still mention, even if it sounds super simple.
Especially when I was in my PhD, I had that problem because I think everybody in grad school has that imposter syndrome, right? So you feel like I'm the only one here not understanding, or that I'm explaining things and something that everybody knows. But then you start talking to others, and for example, in a conference in math, I would just quietly say to someone, hey, I didn't understand anything, and they'd be like, me neither. But they sounded like they knew everything. They just looked so confident, right? And then at the end, it's just everybody's feeling like that, So a little bit of, I was thinking a little bit of kindness can go far. And if you just talk that grad students will understand, or that the undergrads will understand, then if one professor got offended because you were not too simple, then let them. I always say my talks to undergrads and grad students.
Yeah, it's crazy how like this is so true. Where in most conference I go, even in CVPR that I will go in next week, but I went there last year, and like some talks that we attended, I watched my friend, and like they seemed to follow, and I was the only one that seemed lost. But at the end, they had no idea what he was talking about. And it was just always like this. And at the opposite, I never talked to someone and said, or he said, like, this was too simple. Like, this never really happens. Worst case, it's simple and it was just a great refresher or something, but it's not, it cannot be really too simple. Like, it's even, for example, I've seen Jan LeCun's talk a lot, just because he reuses relatively the same talk, and it's relatively straightforward and simple, but it's still interesting every time, and nobody says like this is too simple and useless. It's still interesting, and you can then get a bit deeper, but going through the basics and starting over is definitely useful and even maybe required to be understood and to be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes I even have like experts saying, because experts like think in a very high level and always stay here, right? And they talk here and they understand here. And every now and then, sometimes an expert comes and says, wow, you actually brought it down here and gave me more understanding, something I already understood. But if you bring it to simple, they may have never done that before. Maybe they've always thought about it in high level. And if you give them a different spin, a different way to understand things, you're still adding to them. So you gave the beginners a great overview of what you were working on, and the experts a great like dive into something. So that's how I try to aim it, so that I don't bore the experts, but I also don't like teach the beginners.
If it's interesting enough, and just like your great car comparison, for example, or any low level or high level view that is innovative and interesting, that catch your attention, that's also first really good as an expert, just to like I basically will steal your idea just because it's easier to explain what I do to other people, just because you explained it so well. And it may also be good for researchers to think about their problem differently and maybe come up with another type of solution just by reframing the problem, basically.
Yeah, it's always good to understand things at their basic level. I find that when I do research, I have to do that because otherwise I don't get them. Like I don't understand how level, but I sometimes find that when I talk to researchers and I force them to come to my level of examples, new things come up because you're seeing it from a different angle, right?
Yeah.